Java, each time the objects are created by using new keyword. My method name must be same as my class name. Then it is called constructor. When I initialize the object, what's going to happen? The memory is created for that object. A constructor with parameters are known as parameterized constructor. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on Constructor. I'm your Revati ma'am from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So dear student, in my today's session, I'm going to deal with what is constructor, what are the type of constructor, and how to write program in constructor. So these are the certain topic I'm going to discuss in my today's session. Before going to start my today's session, let me to recall the topic what I have discussed in my previous session. So dear student, in my previous session I started with what is class and what is object. Along with that, I have discussed how to create a class and how to create object. Along with that, I have discussed basic syntax. Along with that, I have discussed how we can define a class and what are the fields I can able to include my class. That is field declaration as well as method declaration. Along with that, I have discussed how to creating objects as well as how to access data members. Suppose, dear student, if I want to create my own class, then I'm going to start with the keyword class. Then I'm going to specify the class name. Inside my class, I can have field declaration as well as methods. For example, say I have int A and B. So these are the fields of the type integer. Then I have the method called display. So it is display. Okay. This display function accepts two values, say x and int 1. Now, okay, what I will do, I'm going to assign the value a equal to x, b equal to y. Okay, this is the example for method declaration. Then I'm going to close the class. Okay, now I'm going to write another class called A. Inside that, I'll write void main function. Okay, so what is the structure of main function in Java program? That is not void main. That is nothing but the static void main. Along with that, I have string args. Okay, fine. After that, what I want to do? I want to create a object of the type B. So B, I'll write B1 equal to new B. Now, with the help of object B1, I can able to call the method. So, how I'm going to call? That is B1.display. Okay, at the same time, I'm going to pass the value 5 and 10. Suppose if I want to access the fields within the class. So, these are the two fields which is present in the class B. And how I'm going to access? That is once again with the help of object, that is B1.A or B1.B, and even I can able to assign the value. So dear student, this is the way I'm going to create a class. I'm going to define the fields as well as I'm going to define the methods as well as I'm going to create the object and I'm going to access the class members with the help of object. Now, dear student, in my today's session, I'm going to deal with constructors in Java. So, what is constructor? What is the use of constructor? And what are the different types of constructor we are going to have in our Java? Along with that, I'm going to deal with rules for creating Java constructor. Anyway, dear student, instead of wasting much of time, let's begin our session with the concept that is constructors in Java. So, construction or constructor, what it is? Suppose if I want to write my own program, I have to follow some methods. And if I consider constructors in Java, that's nothing but I'm going to create the method which is going to have the same name like class name. For example, think that I'm going to create a class called A. So here A is nothing but the class name. Now, if I write same class name inside the class, then it is treated as constructor. So what is constructor here? My class name same as method name. And when the constructors are invoked, when I create the object, when I create the object of the type class, that time the constructors are get invoked or get initialized. Now, in Java, a constructor is a block of code. So, what is constructor? It is like methods in Java. So, what is the difference here? Here, constructor name must be same as class name. For example, let me write another class called B, and if I write add, okay, then I want to specify the return type. So here add is nothing but the method name here. Now, if I consider my first example, what is A? It is a constructor. And constructor does not have any return type. And the constructor name must be same as class name. So what is constructor? It is like a method in Java. It is called when an instance of the class is created. So what is instance here? That is nothing but the object. So when the constructors are called, when I create the object of the type class. So creating object is nothing but the instance of the class. Now, at the time of calling constructor, memory for the object is allocated in the memory. So, dear student, for example, okay, I'm going to create a object obj, that is A. Here A is nothing but the class name equal to new A. Okay, when I call the new operator, and when I'm going to call the new operator, when I want to create the object. Now, when I create object, at the same time, the constructors are get invoked. So, here the constructors are invoked during the object creation, in the sense when I create the object, the same time the constructors are initialized as well as invoked. It is a special type of method which is used to initialize the object. So dear student, if I want to initialize the object, then I can able to use constructor. Every time an object is created using new keyword. So dear student, in Java, each time the objects are created by using new keyword. And when I create the object, what's going to happen? The memory is allocated for that object. So dear student, when I write a obj equal to new a, what's going to happen? I'm going to create the object. At the same time, the memory is allocated for this object. To allocate the memory, I'm going to create I'm going to use new keyword. And this is the example for dynamic memory allocation. In the sense, during the execution of the program, we are going to allocate the memory. It calls a default constructor. So dear student, suppose in my program, I'm not going to use default constructor, but still when I run or when each time I run Java program, the default constructors are invoked. And how it is invoked? During the object creation, the particular default constructors are get invoked. It calls a default constructor if there is no constructor available. So dear student, think that I have written some program and in my program I don't have any constructor, but still constructors are called. And what kind of constructors are called? There's nothing but the default constructor. So if there is no constructor available in the class, in such cases, Java compiler provides a default constructor by default. So what the Java compiler will do? It's going to provide or it's going to call default constructor. Now, what are the rules I need to follow while defining or while creating constructor? So there are two rules defined for the constructor. What are the rules I have? One is constructor name must be same as its class name. So what are the rule? Constructor name must be same as its class name. For example, think that I have the class called student. Now, what is my constructor name? Once again, it is student. Now, a constructor must have no explicit return type. That means, while writing constructor, I'm not going to specify any return type. So, here, I'm not going to write any return type. But my method name must be same as my class name. Then it is called constructor. A Java constructor cannot be abstract, static, final as well as synchronized. That means while creating Java constructor, I cannot able to use the keywords like static, final as well as abstract as well as synchronized. Now, dear student, I'm going to have the type of constructor. So, there are two type of constructor. One is default constructor or no argument constructor, and another one is parameterized constructor. So, dear student, I'm going to repeat. There are two type of constructor. One is default constructor and another one is parameterized constructor. Now, dear student, let me to explain what is default constructor. So, default constructor in the sense what? It does not have any argument and the class name must be method name. So, a constructor is called default constructor when it does not have any parameters. For example, class student. Okay, then inside that, if I'm having student, okay, this is the example for default constructor. Now, let me to check the syntax. So, dear student, as we know that the Java program is always going to start with the class keyword. So, class, I want to specify the class name and I'm going to start with the curly brace. Within this, I'm going to have the class name. So that is nothing but the constructor. So what is the rule? The constructor name same as class name. Okay. So this is the example for default constructor. Anyway, dear student, let me to consider simple example here. So dear student, think that, okay, I have a class called student3. Okay, inside this, I'm going to have two fields. One is name of the type string and another one is ID of the type integer. Now, this is the program to illustrate default constructor. So, how I'm going to write the default constructor? What is the rule I need to follow? The class name must be method name and it does not have any return type. And I'm going to print system dot out dot println example for default constructor. Default constructor. Default constructor. Okay, now I'm going to close the curly brace. Okay, this is the example program to illustrate the use of default constructor. Okay, now within this class, I'm going to have another method called display and I'm displaying ID as well as name. Now, see here, I'm going to have the main function and I'm going to create the object. So, dear student, without this constructor also, this function is going to or this program is going to work fine because suppose if my program does not have any constructor by default, what the compiler will do? It's going to call the default constructor and when it is called, when I create the object S1. So dear student, if I consider this program or with the default constructor, it's going to work fine or it's going to work well. Now, see here, I have the main method. Inside that, I'm going to create the object of the type student3. Okay, which are the object? I have S1 and S2. Now, I'm going to call this display method. So, this display method is present in this class and to access data members in the class, I'm going to use the object. So, what is my object? S1 and S2 are the object. With the help of object, dot method name. See here, S1 is my object, dot is nothing but my operator and display is nothing but the method. And what is the output of this program? I'm going to get, okay, example for default constructor twice. Then I'm going to get 101 Revati. Once again, I'm going to get 101 Revati. So, this is the output of this program. Now, dear student, I'm going to have another type of constructors, that is constructor parameters. That is nothing but the parameterized constructor. So dear student, a constructor with parameters are known as parameterized constructor. For example, I'll take same example. So it is class STUD. Stud is nothing but the class name, and if I create constructor stud with two parameters, then this is the example for parameterized constructor. So constructors can also take parameters which is used to initialize attributes. So attributes are nothing but the fields. Now the constructors are used to initialize the fields. That means while calling the constructor, I am going to pass the value, and that is assigned to the fields. So constructor can also take parameters which is used to initialize attributes. Now parameters are added to a constructor in the same way. So here parameters are added to the constructor in the same way that they are added to the methods. That means how I am going to create a method with parameters. Similar way I am going to create constructor with parameters. Just declare them inside the parenthesis. So whatever the parameter I have, that should be written inside the parenthesis after the constructor. Now dear student, I am going to have the simple program here, and this is the program used to illustrate parameterized constructor. So what is my class name? That is nothing but the student4. Inside this, I have two fields. One is ID of the type integer and another one is name of the type string. And this is the example for parameterized constructor. And what are the parameters I have here? That is I and N. Now I'm going to have the display function, and I'm trying to display ID as well as name. Now inside this class I have the main method. So dear student, what is my class name? That is nothing but student4, and S1 is nothing but my object name, and new is a keyword used to initialize object. When I initialize the object, what's going to happen? The memory is created for that object. And this is my class name, and I'm going to pass the parameters. So dear student, when I pass the parameters, this parameterized constructor is responsible for receiving these values. Now what is I? I is nothing but 111, and string N is nothing but current. And I'm going to assign 111 to ID and current to name. And I'm going to print ID as well as current. Now dear student, when I call display function, what is the output I'm going to get? I'm going to get 111 and current. Okay, this is the example for parameterized constructor. So dear student, from the examination point of view, this concept is very important. You can expect a question like, what is constructor? And what are the different types of constructor we have in Java? So dear student, in my today's session, I started with what is constructor and What are the rules I need to follow while defining the constructor? Along with that, I have discussed default constructor as well as parameterized constructor. Anyway, dear student, let's meet in the next session with the new concept that is called finalizer. Under this concept, once again, we will study what is final keyword, what is finally, what is finalizer. Anyway, dear student, let's meet in the next session with the new concept that is finalizer. Until that, keep watching and keep learning and keep smiling. Thank you.